Go crazy for our next storyteller, Maxie Jones. Maxie Jones.
So I'm in Percy's barbershop in the Bronx, New York. This is the barbershop I have been going to since I was 14 years old. So I'm in the barbershop, and this was back before people made appointments. Nowadays, barbershops take appointments, but this is where you walk into a barbershop on a Saturday, and if Conrad is my barber, I would go, who's last for Conrad? And some guy would go, me, and I'm like, all right, I'm after you. And there's no telling how long that could take, because there's people waiting, they're in the pizzeria or in the grocery store. So you just sit in the barbershop, it could be like 4 or 5 hours. So I'm sitting in the barbershop, and time had passed, and we had gotten through all the conversations, and the conversations get heavy with the fellas when there's no women and children around. So at a certain point, I decided I'm gonna read. So I go to where the magazines and books are, and I see there's this book sitting there among the magazines, and the book, the title of the book is The E-Myth Revisited: Why Small Businesses Don't Succeed and What to Do About It. So I look at this, and at the time, I was in the process of starting my own business in Harlem, in New York, so I was real curious to read this book so that I could see how not to fail. So I asked Percy, the owner of the barbershop, I was like, Percy, can I borrow this book, man? I want to read it. And Percy turned to this guy named Danny. Now, Danny is always in the barbershop on a Saturday, and he's never getting a haircut. And Danny's that guy that he has no problem cursing, no matter who's in the barbershop. So Percy said, hey, Danny, can Maxie borrow this book? Danny's like, you know what, man? I believe you're gonna read the motherfucker. So go ahead and take it home, man, and just make sure you read it, man, and come back and tell me about it, all right? I was like, all right, cool. So I take the book home, and I start reading it. And really, after about the first or second chapter, I kind of got the idea, and I didn't need to finish the book, but I felt like I had to finish the book in case I go back to the barbershop and somebody asks me questions. So I just put the book off to the side, right? So then, like 2 months later, I noticed the book in my apartment. I was like, oh, shoot, I still got this book. So I decided it's better to return it now unfinished than to try to hold it any longer. So I take the book, I put it in my car, I go to the barbershop. Now I'm sitting in the barbershop, and I forgot the book. I left it in my car. I'm sitting in the barbershop, and all of a sudden, Danny turns to Percy and say, hey, Percy, you remember that book I had about starting your own business? Percy's like, yeah, what happened to that book, man? Danny said, man, I lent it to somebody. Can't remember who the fuck it was, man. Who got that book? So Percy's like, I don't know, man, but goddamn, you think somebody bring the book back if they borrowed it? So I'm sitting there and I'm like, yo, they talking about me. And I wonder, do they know they're talking about me and they just trying to fish me? Or I was like, I knew these guys for 30 years. They wouldn't do this to me. They would tell me, hey, Maxie, what you do with the book? So I'm like, they don't even know they're talking about me. So Danny starts going on. He's like, can't let nobody shit, man. So I'm sitting there, and now I don't want to out myself because I can't be that guy you're talking about. And they just were going, and I was just getting more and more upset about the things they were saying. So finally I decided, all right, I was quiet about it, got my hair cut, and I decided, okay, it's time to leave. I'm headed to my car. I get in my car, and there's the book. So I'm like, all right, I could take this book back home, or hell, I could throw it in the garbage. And they would never know that I was the person they were talking about. But then the barbershop is always crowded, so maybe somebody else in the barbershop knew that it was me, and they're probably telling right now that it was me. Somebody's in the barbershop right now saying, that's the guy who got the book. I didn't want to tell you while he was in here, but that guy just went to his car. So now I'm like, all right, I gotta go back in there. I gotta take the book back in there. But I gotta tell them about the shit they were saying about me when they weren't aware that it was me. because they were saying some shit. So I'm like, all right, I'm going back in there, and I'm going to confront them about everything they said. Least they could have done was thought about it or something, say, hey, anybody here know? So I'm going back in, I'm going to take the book back, and I'm going to tell them about themselves, because if they knew it was me, I'm sure they would have said something different, right? So I'm headed back into the barbershop, and as I'm walking, because this is New York, so I'm not parked right outside the barbershop. I had to walk a block or two. So I'm walking back to the barbershop, and as I'm walking back, I realized, you know what? Everything he said was right. I borrowed the book, and I didn't bring it back. So what am I going to say, really? I'm the guy at fault, but I'm trying not to buy into that. I'm like, no, I'm not buying into that. I'm going to tell them about themselves. So I walk in the door, and Percy and Danny, and they all look at me like, what you doing back here? And Danny's like, he got that fucking book. That's right. And I just walked in, and I was like, you know what, Danny? This is the book I borrowed from you a while back. Sorry I took so long returning it. It was a good book, and thanks, man. I handed him the book, and I walked out the barbershop. And I went to my car, and I was like, yeah, I think I confronted him. I think so. Thank you.